Hey guys, it's Mrs. Kumaraswamy, and today we're going to focus on gas exchange. We'll go through the structure and functions and then look at some disorders associated with the respiratory system. Before we do that, though, I want you to think about um, cellular respiration. So if you go back, think about the formula, see if you can still write it out. So hopefully you were able to write out that you have oxygen and glucose going in, and then carbon dioxide, water, and ATP coming out. And really, when we think about the respiratory system, it's all about getting the materials or getting some of the materials needed for cellular respiration and then getting rid of some of the waste products. So cellular respiration happens in the cytoplasm and mitochondria of cells, and it releases energy in the form of ATP for use inside that cell. In humans, oxygen is used in cellular respiration and carbon dioxide gets produced, right? So we have to have a mechanism for taking oxygen in from the surroundings and releasing that carbon dioxide. That process is going to be called gas exchange. This is going to happen in the alveoli of the human lung. And you'll have oxygen diffusing from the air into the blood and capillaries, and then carbon dioxide diffusing in the opposite direction. We'll get more into that as we go through these structures. But that's the basic idea of the respiratory system, being able to exchange those respiratory gases so that cellular respiration can occur at the cellular level. So if we look at the structure of the respiratory system, I always kind of think of it like an upside down tree, where you have kind of your main trunk branch coming in. That's kind of like the trachea, and then it goes down and it branches off into smaller and smaller pieces, with the alveoli being like those leaves at the end of the tree. So if we look a little bit closer at those structures, you have the larynx, which is like your voice box, and then you have the trachea. So if you put your hand on your neck and you feel that tube, that's the trachea that you can feel. And you should be able to feel some bumps on the trachea. So go ahead, reach up, feel the front of your neck. You should be able to feel some bumps on there. That's actually cartilage. And that's going to make sure that it keeps that trachea open all the time. You don't want that collapsing in on itself. And it provides some protection for that tube, because again, you don't want anything happening to that because you need air to be able to move in and out. So you go from the trachea to the bronchi, from the bronchi to bronchioles. Those are going to be smaller little branches, and then the bronchioles end in the alveoli or the alveolar sacs. And then that's all organized into a lung. On the bottom, you have the diaphragm. So if you take a breath in and out, you can feel that diaphragm expanding and contracting. If you're in band or choir, I'm sure that you've heard of your diaphragm. Breathe from your diaphragm. And then the ribs and the muscles that connect the ribs are also really important for helping you get air into and out of your lungs. And we'll talk about how that works as well. So let's focus on the alveoli. These are going to be really important, very delicate structures. So these are going to be really thin, one cell thick, areas where that gas exchange is actually occurring. So blood coming from the heart to the lungs, so it's this pulmonary circuit, is going to be low oxygen, high carbon dioxide. And so it'll have a high concentration of carbon dioxide. And remember, things like to flow from high concentration to low concentration. So the carbon dioxide that's in that blood is going to diffuse into the alveolar space. And then the oxygen in the air that you breathe in is going to be a higher concentration in that alveolar space. And so it will then diffuse into the blood and the capillaries, because those were low O2. So really it's just moving down the concentration gradient. So now that blood is going to leave the lungs, high oxygen, low carbon dioxide, go back to the heart for another kind of boost, and then travel through the body. As it travels through the body, you'll have that opposite exchange going on because you'll have cells that need oxygen to perform cellular respiration, and so there'll be low O2 where the blood would be high O2, and that oxygen will diffuse into the cells. And then if the cells have been doing a lot of cellular respiration and they have high carbon dioxide, that carbon dioxide will diffuse into the blood. The red blood cells are actually the ones that carry the oxygen and carbon dioxide. The heme group and the hemoglobin will selectively bind the O2 and CO2. So it's pretty straightforward. You inhale, all of that air that you take in has a combination of different gases like oxygen and nitrogen and carbon dioxide. But because the O2 is at a higher concentration in an alveolar space, it's going to diffuse into the blood, and the carbon dioxide will diffuse out of the blood. And so when you exhale, the air that you exhale will have a lower oxygen concentration and a higher carbon dioxide concentration. So if we look more closely at alveolar structure, there's a few different kinds of cells that you should be familiar with. So the first one is your type 1 pneumatocytes. And they make up the thin layer of the alveolar walls. And they're going to allow for you to have this kind of exchange. So they're actually where that exchange takes place. Then you have type 2 pneumatocytes. Those are the green ones that you see. Obviously, they're not green in real life, just in this image. And they make something called a surfactant, which is going to coat the alveoli. So surfactant is going to be important because in order for diffusion to take place, you need to have moist membranes. So you cannot have diffusion through a dried out membrane. So you need these moist membranes. They also are going to reduce surface tension. And that's going to be really important because you do not want these delicate little, they kind of look like clusters of grapes, but these delicate little air sacs to collapse in on themselves. And then the last major cell type that you'll see in there are macrophages. And these are part of your immune system. Their main job is to engulf and destroy bacteria and other debris in your lungs. So they help clean up the place. So that's their main job. So you have three main cell types. Type 1 pneumatocytes, which make up most of the structure. They're one cell thick. They're specialized for diffusion. So O2 will diffuse through that surfactant layer into that type 1 pneumatocyte, and then from that type 1 pneumatocyte into that interstitial space in the capillary, and then into the red blood cell. So they make up that kind of wall that the material is diffused through. Then you have your type 2 pneumatocytes, and those are going to create that surfactant layer. And then your macrophages are going to keep the place neat and tidy and try to get rid of anything causing trouble. So again, the surfactant is going to be kind of, you can think of it kind of like a soapy film. It's similar to a phospholipid. It's made up of proteins and lipids that lines that alveoli, reducing surface tension, which is important because you don't want them to collapse in on themselves. And it keeps surfaces moist, which is necessary for that diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide. One of the major complications that occurs with preemies, so babies that are born too early or before term, is that they haven't built up a surfactant layer yet. And so one of the treatments is they will introduce surfactant to the lungs. So if we think about the function of those alveoli, it's important again to remember you have carbon dioxide and oxygen exchange, and this is going to happen through diffusion. So gases, just like everything else, is moving down the concentration gradient from high to low naturally. So it's going to want to move down from a high concentration to a low concentration until you reach some level of equilibrium. And so gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen are doing just that. Ventilation is the fancy word for breathing. It's just moving air into and out of those alveoli. And ventilation in the lungs actually has everything to do with gas pressure. So gas is going to flow from high to low pressure. So if you think about a balloon, if you squeeze the balloon, the air is going to want to move out of the balloon. If you expand the balloon or the container, air is going to want to move into that lower pressure area. So inspiration, like when you inhale, your diaphragm is going to drop. So if you put your hand on your diaphragm, so that's kind of like the lower part of your rib cage, and you inhale, the diaphragm drops, the thorax, that whole chest area, increases in volume. And that increase in volume causes the pressure to decrease, which pulls air in. Expiration or exhaling, the opposite is going to happen. The thorax volume decreases, so now you have a smaller volume, and that pressure will increase and air will flow out. And so all of this is accomplished through muscles expanding and contracting. So your ribs are surrounded by what we call intercostal muscles. You have external and internal ones, and they are going to contract and relax differently. So when you inhale, the external or outside intercostal muscles contract, which moves your rib cage up and out. The diaphragm also contracts, making it smaller, right? And it becomes flatter, which moves down. So these muscle movements increase that volume. They cause everything to kind of expand out, which drops the pressure and pulls it in. The opposite happens when you exhale. So now the internal intercostal muscles contract, which moves the rib cage back down. The abdominal muscles contract, which pushes the diaphragm up into like a dome shape. And that's going to decrease the volume. When we talk about those muscle pairs, they're what we call antagonistic muscle pairs. They're not teasing each other, like antagonizing each other, but they're antagonistic because they work opposite each other. So muscles are really good at contracting, but they need something to pull them apart so they can relax. And so when a muscle contracts, it shortens. I usually use the bicep and tricep as a good example of that. So if you relax your arm out and then put your pinky right by the inside of your elbow and your thumb further up towards your shoulder, and then you contract, you'll notice that your fingers are coming closer to each other. So you make like you move your arm up, you make a muscle. That's contracting, it gets shorter. As that's getting shorter, the triceps, the opposite side, are actually getting longer. They're being pulled apart. In order to get your arm to go back the other direction, you have to contract the triceps, which pulls the biceps open. So those are just antagonistic muscle pairs. Those same things are going on in your lungs with those intercostal muscles and then abdominal and diaphragm muscles. So again, we're looking at those intercostal muscles, inhaling and exhaling. I find it useful to actually like inhale, think about what muscles are moving, exhale, think about what muscles are moving, and kind of do that a few times. It's a good chance to get your calming breaths in too. So take a few deep breaths, think about what's going on with your muscles and the volume of the lungs. So let's all take 3 deep breaths together. So inhale and exhale. Inhale and exhale. Last one. Inhale and exhale. Okay, so now we're going to move into some diseases of the respiratory system. As you can imagine, the lungs are important. We need them, and we need them to be healthy. Um, Two major diseases of the lungs include lung cancer. The main cause for lung cancer is smoking. Um, you also have air pollution, radon, asbestos, silica, or other inhaled solids can also contribute to lung cancer. What happens is this increases the damage to the lung tissue, and as those cells regenerate, they're more likely to accumulate mutations, and those mutations could result in cancer. So mutagens or physical damage to the cells that requires them to go through that cell cycle more times increases the likelihood that you would have a cancer anywhere. Emphysema, you end up with less alveoli with thicker walls. When those walls are damaged and can't be repaired, the alveoli start to fuse together, and this results in less efficient diffusion. It's a larger space, it's harder to diffuse, there's not as much surface. And so people with emphysema have to labor quite a bit in order to be able to get the proper gas exchange. And so oftentimes they'll need to use like an oxygen mask. And then we come to COVID-19. So if you're not comfortable with this, you don't have to watch this part of it. You can turn me off now. But COVID-19 right now, as we know it, on April 24th, 2020, it targets those type 2 pneumatocytes. And so what's happening is you're destroying those type 2 pneumatocytes. So if you remember from a few minutes ago, they produce that surfactant. So without even thinking about all of the other complications, if you're damaging the pneumatocytes, you're also going to reduce the ability of gases to diffuse. So if you're not creating that surfactant layer, you're going to have an increase in surface tension. You're also going to decrease in the ability to diffuse. And, we need oxygen. We need that oxygen to get in. If you want to take a closer look, one of the things that can happen with the COVID-19 virus, and this is just a short little cartoon strip about one of the things that can happen with infection for COVID-19, is that virus enters. It docks onto a receptor on the type 2 pneumatocytes. And cells are smart. They know when they've been invaded and taken over. And so what they start to do is they call for help from your immune system. So as that cell becomes damaged, it's going to send out signals letting your immune system know that it's damaged. And the normal response to that is for all of these immune proteins and cells to respond. And so one of the ways that your body deals with an infection is through the inflammatory response. And so you have like interleukins and MC3 and all of these different cells moving into the space. You also are influencing that capillary and making it open up more so that more cells are going to be diffusing. But the problem is that fluids are also going to be moving into that alveolar space. So you have all of these cells moving into this space, you have all of this fluid moving into this space and really crowding out that alveoli. There's also some evidence to suggest that there's an increase in clotting factors. So people start having blood clots all over. And as all of the inflammatory and immune cells start to fill up the alveoli and fluid moves into the interstitial space and into the alveoli. You have clots forming. The end result is that you can no longer oxygenate that blood, so patients become hypoxic. And so this is one of the ways that COVID-19 is causing harm in individuals. So as all of these cells and fluids are flooding into that space, you're damaging the type 1 and type 2 pneumocytes, because the immune response is really like, there's a virus, we got to kill everything, we got to get it out of here. But unfortunately, that makes that alveolar space non-functional, and we need to be able to get oxygen. There'll be another presentation with way more detail on how this works, but I figured this was a good place to bring that in. So I hope you guys are doing well. I hope that helped. If you have any questions, you are always welcome to ask me. Take care.